let's talk about adding two numbers together. So we've all been adding numbers together for, well, quite a number of years, hopefully, and it's really something which is kind of intuitive. But how do we actually add numbers together? How do we know how to add numbers together? C# does include the addition operator. And so the addition operator, you can do something like console.writeLine, and we can go ahead and say 4 plus 5, and it knows that, hey, that's an integer, that's an integer. I have a operator which tells me that if I have two integers, you take those, you add them together. So 4 plus 5 is equal to 9. But what if you have a fraction? How do you add a fraction together? How do you deal with fractions? How do you do anything with fractions? Fractions are a pain. I hate fractions, but we still have to deal with them from time to time. So I figured that we could torture each other, mainly torture myself, and write a class to deal with fractions. And as part of that, we will also learn how to write a method to add two fractions together. So I'm going to create a public class fraction. And this fraction, so every fraction has a numerator and a denominator. Private int numerator, private int denominator, probably should make that smaller because it's going to take me a while to remember how to spell denominator, but oh well. And I need to go ahead and set up my gets and sets for these. So public int numerator and get return this dot numerator, and set is going to be this dot numerator is equal to value. And again, we do the same thing for denominator. And I'm lazy, so I'm going to just put this there. Denominator. And because I don't want to have to remember how to type denominator, there we have that. And let's go ahead and create a constructor. Public fraction and int numerator, int denominator. And this is going to this dot numerator, not lowercase numerator, we want uppercase numerator, is equal to numerator, and this dot denominator is equal to denominator. All right, so we just have our gets and sets and everything. Let's see, what else do we need for this? We want some way to print out the fraction. So public void print fraction. So we don't need to take anything, and this will just print the fraction. Console.writeLine, string interpolation, and this will be this dot numerator slash, and then this dot denominator. So we have all of those, and so we can print it out. So let's go ahead and create a fraction. And so we can do something like fraction, frac1 is equal to new fraction. And this requires a value for numerator denominator, 3, 5. And we can go ahead and print it. Fraction1 is not equal, dot print fraction. And that will print out 3/5 to the console. 3/0. Oh, I did a capital D there. That should be a lowercase d. Now it will print out 3/5 to the console. So really all I'm doing is I'm just creating a new object of type fraction from the new fraction. And inside of there, I am just calling this print fraction. There is another thing that we can add in. So if you notice that when we have a, I'll just say int num1 is equal to 42, and then we do console.writeLine num1. So writeLine takes in a value. In this case, we're giving it an int. But if I want it to be a string, I can take that and do a .toString. And so this now is taking in a string as a value. So the int class has a method, an overridden method, override, because it is actually pulling toString from an inherited class, but it is overriding that to create a string toString. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for our fraction class. Public override string to string. So we don't need to give it any parameters. We could give it some parameters, because that toString we can also give it some parameters, but for right now I'm just going to override the parameterless toString. And for this, all we need to do is return an interpolated string that we just say this dot numerator slash this dot denominator. And so this line, oops, if I put a semicolon, this line is very similar to this here, only this is a void type. We're not actually returning anything. This is a toString that we are actually returning. So we could even say here, we can say, well, we can call the this.toString. So that is actually going to call the exact same method that we have there. So when I run this, we're going to get out 3/5. And we can do this. We can say fraction frac2 is equal to new fraction. And I'm going to go ahead and just choose 1/5, for instance. And now we could say console.writeLine frac2. So we could say frac2, or we could say frac2.toString. This toString is actually redundant. We don't need that. But either way, we are going to get out 1/5. Or if we just say frac2, this is going to also print off 1/5. So this toString, when you give it into WriteLine and you give it an object, it is going to call the toString method and replace whatever is in there with the string representation of that. And we just define it as this, and we are overriding the actual toString method.